I do research on sustainable mobility, personal mobility, so I look at people's way of transporting themselves with the focus on the vehicle. So my two main areas of research are electric vehicles, looking from the user perspective, and then also innovative mobility forms such as car sharing and ride sharing. So it's hard to give a yes or no answer. There are trends that are showing that we are moving. There are other trends that are less so, because we are still moving around mostly with single occupied vehicles. However, there are some points that I think are very positive from the development during the last years. And that is electric vehicles are coming into the market much stronger than what was predicted about 10 years ago. And then are these innovative mobility forms, so different ways of sharing mobility that provide different alternatives for people to move away from the privately owned vehicle. So there are three general types of measures that can be taken if we look at it from a wider perspective. One is to diminish the demand for transportation in general, and that is through building denser cities, getting people closer, actually increasing accessibility rather than mobility. Then the second one is increasing efficiency of the transportation modes that we have. It can be looking at individual vehicles, so making them much more efficient, but also shifting to more efficient transportation modes, such as public transport. And the third one is to shift the fuels that we use. So move away from fossil-intensive fuels, such as gasoline and diesel, that are dominating right now, to less fossil-intensive, where electricity is one of them, and in some cases biofuels might be an alternative as well. I think we need both. So we need both technical fixes that people can use, but we shouldn't forget that technical fixes, for example, the electric vehicle, need behavioral change for people to be able to adopt them. So sometimes we believe that the technical fixes will solve things, but to be able to people use these technical fixes, they actually have to change their behavior. And then, of course, technology can help changing behavior as well. So, for example, smartphones, new IT technology can help to change behavior. So that's a technological fix that changes behavior. So they are kind of dependent of each other, and we both need them to be able to reach a sustainable mobility. It's hard to actually find one measure that is the most important. However, the general idea is that you have to make the bad option more costly. And so one measure that has been very successful and that we have to continue to have is to have a carbon tax. So, for example, carbon tax or a fuel tax like we've had in Europe and Sweden has been very important to keeping the emissions actually lower than what they would have been if we compare to the US or Australia and Canada. So that's important to keep that being. But then that's not sufficient. We need to complement that with a lot of other measures that make the alternatives more attractive and easier to use, and that make the bad solution, which is the privately owned personal vehicle that is driven on fossil fuels, to be less attractive. This is actually the hardest question, because in a way what you need is that you need to have politicians, for example, when it comes to carbon tax, that actually can take the decision and can decide that this is the right thing to do. Then, of course, you need a public opinion that supports this. And I think one way of making it more supportive is that there are alternatives. So if we look at cities today, for example, there's a lot of discussion about parking, reducing the amount of parking. And that reduces the utility of having a private-owned vehicle. But if you don't provide these people with an alternative for them towards the private-owned people, then they will be very much against the reduction of parking spaces. But if they see that there's an alternative, then it will be more acceptable. So you have to be courageous enough to provide this tough measure, but also make sure that people find that they have an alternative that they can choose from. I should say that I'm very focused on an urban setting, because I think that's where some of the biggest problems are. So when I describe my dream path, it's kind of the dream path of an urban city which has a much lower, you could say maybe in the future has zero private ownerships of vehicles. And that is a pathway in which you restrict slowly but surely the amount of, for example, parking spaces, different subsidies that are connected to it, private ownerships of vehicles, increase fuel prices, at the same time as you make it possible for the alternatives to grow. And so you do this stepwise in small steps until you reach, in the end, the city in which you don't have any private owned vehicles in the city center.